Regarding Parkinson's disease brains, so in those 10 brain banks, not everybody is collecting all the different diseases. So we have agreed, we work together as a consortium, and we have agreed that certain brain banks collect certain type of diseases. So the Imperial Brain Bank, which is in London, collects mostly brains from Parkinson's patients. Whereas we in Oxford, we collect brains from normal controls and also, most importantly, patients who have this RBD, which is very important for us to understand more about the pathomechanisms of that prodromal condition. But I just wanted to specify that. But Marie is here really to explain more about how the brain banks in general work, which also implies to the Parkinson's disease brain bank in Imperial. Please.
Okay, so my name is Marie Hamard. I'm one of the managers at the Oxford Brain Bank. As Laura just said, we are one brain bank in the UK. We work in a whole network of them. But hopefully what I'm going to say is relevant to all brain banks. And I'm going to say a little bit more about what the Oxford Brain Bank specifically is about and what sort of research we support here. I should tell you that there are some images of brain in this presentation, so just to warn you, there are images of human brains, and I'm going to talk about death. So what is a brain bank? A brain bank is a resource. It's a tool that brings together researchers and donors who may or may not have a neurological disease. So why we need a tool is because it's actually extremely complex to organize sourcing, collecting these valuable samples, and then storing them in accordance with very complex legislation, and having mechanisms to make sure that they're accessible to researchers in a way that's going to be most helpful possible. So first of all, it's something that can allow people who want to make something horrible turn into something valuable. So there are a lot of people who we've talked to over the years who've said that they are grateful for the opportunity to donate their brain after they die or their relatives die. We then take care of all the governance that exists around sort of biosamples. Some of you will have heard, I'm sure, of some organ retention scandals in the 1990s, Alder Hey Hospital and the likes. So there is very stringent legislation in the UK, which is quite unique in the world actually, about the storage and the use of human tissue in research. And that is something that we are very well versed in. And we are a structure that permit the storage of these samples in compliance with the Human Tissue Act and all the regulations that exist with it. Not only that, but also things like donor confidentiality and data protection legislation. The other thing that we do is we allow researchers to access samples in a kind of simplified way. Instead of having to apply individually for lots of ethics committees to do lots of different parts of their research, they can apply to us, and the Research Ethics Committee here in Oxford gives us the authorization, the permission to review research projects and decide whether they are an ethical use of the samples that we hold, which simplifies the process a lot for researchers and then takes a lot less time, hopefully, as well. And perhaps most importantly is the bottom one here. Giving researchers access to exactly what it is that they need. So we have a lot of communication. It's a two-way communication with researchers about what they might want to collect, in what format, for what purpose. And we work together with a network of colleagues, many of whom are sitting in this room, who help us answer researchers' queries and sort of modulate their questions and their research hypotheses so that they can answer things with what we hold in the brain bank. So the Oxford Brain Bank is one of 10 brain banks. This is a kind of fairly typical structure for a brain bank. So here's Professor Laura Parkinen. You've heard her talk earlier. She's the brain bank director. We have a management committee which has a lot of representation from our local coordinators and our local researchers who feed into this process, and Michelle is one of them. So yeah, that's how we kind of get together several times a year to try and discuss how the brain bank is run on the day-to-day. Above all of that is a steering committee. The steering committee is completely external to our team, and they look after, they have oversight over what we do. They ensure that everything that we're doing is ethical, that we are complying with what we said we would do, that the finances are in order, that everything has an audit trail, and that we are, fulfilling our goals, per se. And then the people who work day to day in the brain bank, there's me here with shorter hair, and there's my colleague Caroline. Caroline is what we call our tissue coordinator, so she's basically the person who will ensure all of the donors can get their brains into the brain bank. So she is the person who will talk to the people in all our different cohorts, Discovery and the OPDC being one of them, about seeking consent for the Oxford Brain Bank donation from their participants. She will also talk directly to the donors and their relatives. And then, unfortunately, because obviously brain donation occurs after a donor's death, she's the one who then kind of coordinates that with the mortuaries, the coroners, the funeral directors, specialist couriers and all of that to make sure that the stress on the family of the donor is as little as possible. And then Caroline's also responsible for making sure that the brains that we receive go through the laboratory in good time to end up under Laura's microscope to be diagnosed before they can be available for research. On the other side, what I'm doing is more to do with this kind of governance framework I talked about earlier. So I'm in close contact with the University of Oxford Research Services governance teams to make sure that we are complying with all the different policies and legislations that we need to. The same on the NHS side, so we work primarily within the Oxford University Hospitals NHS Trust. So I work very closely with their R&D office for the same reasons, to make sure that I comply with all the appropriate regulations on that side. Also, people I talk to on a regular basis, the Research Ethics Committee, who approve the brain bank and its operations, prepare yearly reports to them, let them know of any changes to what we're planning to do, and also any modifications that we might have to our documents that we put out to donors. Our funders also require regular updates from me about how we are performing and what we might need as well. I then also coordinate the reviewing of any of those requests that come in from researchers. So Caroline will deal with sort of brains coming in, and I'm mostly concerned with samples going out towards researchers on the other side. And then, of course, I've got this communication going with the researchers who might want access to the samples to try and figure out whether we can help them and how. Regulation-wise, there's also the Human Tissue Authority and the designated individual at the university to make sure that everything is according to the law. We get submitted to regular inspections where we have to prove that everything is as it should be. And then kind of down bottom here, I've also put obviously the other brain banks in the UK. We work very closely together. We try and have the same processes and very similar ways that research can contact us, so that it's easy for a researcher to understand how to access samples. And I've put contract specialists because it's a thing, but that's because we sometimes send samples outside the University of Oxford, and so there are a number of kind of contractual things that we need to put in place there. And then down here, a very important person is Abby. She's currently our only lab tech. She's the person who is kind of on the day-to-day processing those samples in the lab to make sure that from the brain donation we get a diagnosed, kind of confirmed pathological diagnosis, and then helps us prepare samples to send to researchers. This will be very similar to what happens at Imperial Brain Bank, which is where most of the Parkinson's disease brains that get donated in the UK, if not all, end up in the end. So if you suffer from Parkinson's disease, chances are that you will hear from Imperial Brain Bank rather from the Oxford Brain Bank, but the functioning is very, very similar. It's just a kind of divvying up of resources to collect different cohorts. I will tell you a little bit more about what the Oxford Brain Bank is focusing on and why it's in any way relevant to you, because the Imperial Biobank is the one that you will most likely hear from. So some questions. Here we've got a picture of a brain that was donated to the Brain Bank. I thought it was quite interesting because it resembles some of the MRI images that you've seen earlier. So that's kind of to show how much MRI is amazing, because it looks exactly like the real thing. But there are a lot of things that you can't answer with imagery alone or biomarkers. So some of the frequently asked questions are on here. Of course, you are welcome to ask any other questions that you might want. So the first one, will all OPDC participants be asked to donate to the Oxford Brain Bank? No. A very small minority probably will be asked. Control participants will be asked to contribute to the Oxford Brain Bank, and RBD sufferers will also be asked. In the future, there might be other cohorts of participants that we might ask as well. This is kind of in collaboration with Imperial and with OPDC that we decide sort of who might be the best person to collect which brains. So most of you probably won't hear from us. How do you sign up for brain donation? That is probably one of the most common questions. At the minute, the best way to get involved is to sign up for those research registers at the back, and then get signposted to us or to Imperial Brain Bank, depending on where it might be most suitable. You can also get in touch with us directly, but most likely you might be signposted elsewhere if that happens. And then the process of how to sign up is you will have a discussion with a research nurse or your consultant who will explain all the ins and outs of brain donation. You'll have the same as what you get for other research cohorts. You'll have a participant information sheet to read, a conversation with someone where you will decide, yeah, I'm interested in this, or no, that's not for me. Well, if you don't want to donate your brain, then that's absolutely fine. Brain donation is obviously quite a different type of research participation. It happens after you're gone. It can be a bit worrying what sort of impact it can have on relatives or people who are left behind. So it's a conversation that is very important to have with people around you if that is something that you wanted to consider. But if you don't want to donate your brain, that will have absolutely no impact whatsoever on your clinical care or any of your participation in OPDC. You can change your mind even if you've said, yes, I want to do it at any point. You can go, actually, I don't want to do it anymore, and nobody will ask you for a reason at all. That is entirely up to you. And what would happen then is we would delete all information that we have about you and just leave you alone. Your relatives can also decide that they don't want your brain to be used for research after you die. That is quite an important point, because sometimes we do have people who give consent during life to brain donation, and they really want to do it, but they haven't discussed it with their relatives, and their relatives don't want that to happen. And if your relatives were to disagree with the donation, we wouldn't go ahead with it, even if you said that you wanted to do it. Because it's too much. We can't be fighting people for anyone's brains. What happens after the death of a donor? So Carolyn is the person who deals with most of that phase of things. So the most important thing is that somebody needs to tell us. So that is another reason why we encourage people to talk to their relatives about brain donation, is that they need to be aware that that is what is going to happen, so that they can let the appropriate brain bank, be it us or Imperial, that somebody has died. And then we would get in touch with this person's relatives, and go from there as to kind of getting the death certificate and making sure that all of the aspects of getting that brain into the brain bank are taken care of as quickly and sort of with as little fuss as possible. It doesn't actually delay any funeral arrangements typically, but it is of course quite a difficult time for anyone who is left behind. So it's a very sensitive sort of process between Caroline and the different stakeholders to make sure that everything can happen smoothly and quickly. Another question, can researchers know who you are? No, is the very sort of short answer. Everything is anonymized, so even if Michelle or Laura wanted to use samples from the Oxford Brain Bank, they would have no idea who it came from. So that is another one of the kind of very important functions of the Brain Bank, is that we hold all of the personal information that is basically only held in case somebody was to withdraw consent. And all of that is completely isolated from the work of researchers, so all they would get is a code. And any information that would allow people to identify you would be kept very protected inside the Brain Bank. Who funds the Brain Bank? The Brain Bank is funded mostly by charitable donations to Alzheimer's disease-related charities at the minute, but also receives things from sort of national initiatives like the NIHR Biomedical Research Centre, and also is very much supported by the department in the University of Oxford, so the Nuffield Department of Clinical Neurosciences, NDCN, does a lot of supporting of the Brain Bank. There's also something that I need to talk to you about, which is that we do operate a cost recovery policy, which means that we charge researchers to access the samples. This does not mean that we sell pieces of brain to people who want to do research. It only recoups a tiny proportion of the costs of the Brain Bank, but it is a vital source of income for us to be able to continue providing samples to people. Finally, who decides what research projects can access those samples? We have an access committee which is made up of experts in the field, again, many of whom are sitting here in this room. So what happens is when a researcher wants to access samples, they will send a form to us explaining what it is that they want to do. All of these forms are checked by me. I check that everything is in order and that they are legit researchers, that they have funding from their research, that we can actually provide what they're asking. And then I will let relevant experts in the field of research in our access committee know about the request. They will read the form and give their opinion. Yes, we should support this. Almost never, no, we shouldn't support this unless we don't have what they need. But there might be comments to kind of refine the research question, or kind of say, well, hang on a minute, you said you wanted 1,200 samples, but I think you only need 30. That sort of thing, to make sure that we are giving samples to who actually need them. Journey of a brain from donation to diagnosis and to research sample takes approximately 16 weeks, 10 to 16 weeks from the donor's death. It comes most of the time to us fresh, so fresh from the autopsy room. We will freeze half of the brain and fix the other one in formaldehyde fixative. This is because those things are used for different things, so we need the fixed brain to make those paraffin blocks, which are here, which have sections of the brain, and that is useful for a whole host of techniques that we can't do otherwise. And very crucially, that is completely required for any type of microscope diagnostic, which is what Laura was talking to you about. So half fixed, and the other half is frozen, which will be very useful for things like DNA or proteomics analysis, things that need the brain to be sort of fresh tissue. And we freeze those in ultra-low temperature freezers and keep them. So from that, we'll get those paraffin blocks I was telling you about 4 weeks in. There'll be, Abby will do a lot of work sectioning those, putting them on microscope slides, staining them with different dyes so that we get those microscope slides, and then Laura and her colleagues will look at them under the microscope and diagnose what sort of pathology is involved. And that will go beyond, yes, this is Parkinson's disease, or this is vascular dementia. There are a lot of very precise criteria that will allow what Laura and the others were talking about, which is this stratification of cases. What sort of disease are we talking about here? What sort of hallmarks of the disease are present? Which ones are absent? So that we can really kind of send the right things to answer the right research questions. Our research program is very varied. Over here, I've put the small part of OPDC that is currently feeding into the Oxford Brain Bank, which is mostly the REM sleep behavior disorder patients. They are also here very crucially healthy control donors. We're also part of something called Brains for Dementia Research, which is a very large national initiative recruiting people with different dementias. They go through sort of very long clinical follow-up and give biosamples similar to what you've heard about, so lumbar puncture and blood, during many, many years before they come to us. We also have a big motor neuron disease focus, multiple sclerosis and demyelinating diseases. Again, with the multiple sclerosis, there is a national biobank, which also happens to be in Imperial, so they work together very closely. And then we have a new focus on traumatic brain injuries here and frontotemporal dementia at the bottom. Where we send our samples, at the minute, so here, you probably can't see that because it's tiny, but the darker blue here is University of Oxford, so it's almost half of the samples that we collect go kind of locally to support research projects at the university itself. The rest of the UK is in light blue here, so you can see like maybe 80% of all of our samples go in the UK to research inside the UK. Purple here is rest of Europe, so we do send samples abroad, although that is something that you can opt out of if you want to support just British research. Similarly for the US here, we have a small slice here for the rest of the world. And then importantly, I wanted to talk about this green bit here, which is commercial companies. So we do collaborate directly with a lot of pharmaceutical companies who do research on those samples. And that is again something that people can opt in or out of on their consent form. I know that I'm out of time, so I'm going to very quickly, you've heard a lot about the research, mostly about research that happens from people in life, but there are a lot of research papers coming out on Parkinson's disease based, those are all directly in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, 5 years maybe, on from samples in the brain bank. And those are things that we'll look at comparisons between what exactly goes on between the brains of people with this or that pathology compared to controls, or different sort of presentations of the same disease. A lot of genetic studies as well, and very, very importantly, to compare what you see in the genes with what the actual picture in the brain is. So that is where the post-mortem things are very, very important. It's something that you can't really do unless you have the post-mortem brain. So you can compare genetics between clinical presentations, but you can't do it with the actual pathology in the brain unless you have people donating their brains after they die. And that is all from me.